Welcome to the SoccerWire Podcast, the weekly show that focuses on the youth game and player development in the United States. This is Chris Hummer filling in for this week's show, while regular host Mark Serber is in Florida covering the Girls DA Winter Cup. Big shoes to fill, but we'll see how we do. I'm here in studio with Quinn Casteel, Charles Boehm, and Bridget Baker, and we're ready to take the field again to continue our discussion of the professionalization of youth soccer. In this episode, we'll dig in deeper to that conversation around the huge buzzword, pay to play. It's episode 11 on December 11th, 2019, and the SoccerWire Podcast is set for a festive kickoff. All right, and we kick off episode 11 with the SoccerWire Podcast with Managing Editor Quinn Casteel. Quinn, what have you been tracking?
Well, Chris, this weekend, Stanford captured the Women's College Cup title. They beat UNC in PKs 5-4 after a 0-0 draw in regulation and overtime in the title match. And that's the third College Cup title in program history for Stanford. All have been under head coach Paul Ratcliffe over the past 17 years.
Charlie, you have a little bit of feedback on this game, perhaps, with the style of play UNC or how it looked?
Yeah, Chris, this was a fascinating game. I hadn't gotten to watch a high-level women's college game like this in a while, and it was a fascinating spectacle. Two really high-quality teams, a lot of talent, a lot of youth national teamers, future women's national teamers out on the field, but the contrast in styles was at times fascinating, but also at times jarring because it was North Carolina are still in the elite of college soccer, right? But they've grown into such a bruisingly direct physical team. There's a hockey element to the way Anson Dorrance, he's a very clever coach, very well organized team, great spirit to them. But he maximizes the value of the substitution rules that to make the most of the talent he has and the high pressing style they want. So they just they bring in lines. They'll bring in an entire new line of midfielders, halfway through the half, and it's just go, just in a destructive way, right? And they were maybe not their best in terms of like their offensive creativity, and he said that at his halftime television interview. But some of the challenges were just bruisingly physical, were almost violent in a way. I was frustrated to see, it's one thing to see players get stuck in that way. It's another to see them not get punished for it. I mean, it was a game that could have easily had double-digit yellow cards, I thought. But it's another example. Again, I'm not immersed in the college game, but every time I step back in, and I saw it when I went and watched the Georgetown men's Elite Eight game last weekend as well, the standard of refereeing is just so much more lax compared to the professional game, whether it's MLS, USL, or overseas. It's startling to me, and I think it's this perfect storm we have in the college game of a high-intensity season, really lax substitution rules, the physicality and the style of play that you normally see on both the men's and women's sides, and then the refereeing that kind of allows physical challenges to go unpunished or underpunished. It just left me scared for the players. And there was a really talented kid from locally here in Virginia, Emily Fox, did her ACL in the quarterfinals, and I don't want to blame it on the challenge entirely, but there was a physical coming together on the play that got her hurt, and she's not going to be able to go to the senior national team camp this winter as a result of it. I know people got I talked about it on Twitter a little bit. People got upset about the idea that I was attacking referees or that particular referee, which I wasn't. It's not just about the referees. It's about the sanctioning bodies. It's the culture of the game, the style of play, the rules. All those things come together to make this a maelstrom of what I think could be. I think it could be better, and I'd love to have a discussion, whether it's here, whether it's on social media, whether it's in the comments section on SoccerWire.com, about what we think of that. If this is the style of play that we all think is the best we can do, or the safest we can provide for these kids, and maybe what are some efficient, easy ways that we could look at evolving.
Yeah, I mean, I think a simplest answer would be changing the substitution rule would relate to not being able to do that ice hockey style line change, which sort of makes a lot of sense. That means that players would have less energy and they wouldn't be running as fast when they crash into each other at the very least.
I don't have a problem with a high pressing style. It can be really entertaining, can be very, very effective when used well. I think in some ways it's in the American DNA. Anson talked about this is our DNA, it's pressing. And it's probably maybe in our DNA as a country. And I think I'd love to see our national teams do more of it. But it's almost like it's on steroids in college because the substitution rules allow it to sustain at an intensity, right? If you have 3 subs, if you got 14 bodies max, you can't do it for 90 minutes typically in most situations, or you have to do a unique fitness regimen, right? There's this sort of give and take that the college substitution rules don't force coaches to deal with at that level. And again, I think it's a great example. I urge listeners, if you haven't listened to one of our early shows about the college reform efforts, the 2-semester season, I came away from both these tournaments this year really thinking it's just so many examples of why it matters. A 2-semester season with more limited substitution rules that would allow a more methodical sort of game to unfold could be so good for the ecosystem as a whole.
Certainly something we would dig into for an entire episode. The contrast of that, though, is maybe it worked out the way it should in the soccer purist's mind. Stanford has just won 2 out of the last 3 college cups. It was on PKs, but it's kind of like when there's a bad PK awarded and they end up missing, it's kind of like it was meant to be. So for the soccer purists that don't like that direct style, you could say
justice was done.
Yeah, we've all been waiting for that 23rd UNC championship. You keep thinking like they were like this old, kind of like DC United, right? They won all these. They were the original champion because when college soccer first started, they won like the first 17 or 18 or 19 in a row. Mm-hmm. And when I was younger, it was the UNC was basically the de facto champion, and they haven't won it in a while now. But they, no matter how low of a season you think they have in the standings, they keep showing up in the final 8 and the final 4 and now the final. So again,
really well coached team. Still a lot of good players, and I thought Anson did the best he could. Stanford is an extremely good team. I mean, you're looking at potentially half of their starting 11 could become not just national teamers, but national team legit starters or stars, right? And so I thought Anson did well from a coaching perspective to keep his team in the game till the very end, take it all the way to PKs. But when you watch, I'm so excited to see where Katerina Macario goes. Hopefully she gets her citizenship. She becomes fully eligible for the women's team. She's a special player. Sophia Smith, who had we've been watching her for a while come up through the system. I thought she wasn't at her best in the U20 World Cup last year, but she's just a menace out there on either wing, just a creative player, assertive player. Like I'm just, again, really stoked to see her mature into hopefully a national team regular. I see signs of the positive evolution that we've all been thinking maybe is coming down the pike in terms of the women's talent line.
Fingers crossed. All right, Quinn, let's go to the men's side.
Yeah, speaking of Stanford, the men's college cup is down to the semifinals. Going to be played. Both semifinals and the final will be this weekend down in Cary, North Carolina. Stanford at number 7 is still alive. Their lowest seed that's still remaining. They're going to be going up against number 3 Georgetown. And on the other side of the bracket, number 1 UVA going up against number 4 Wake Forest. So look out for the men's semifinals on Friday night. And maybe by the end of the weekend, Stanford could be celebrating a men's college cup championship as well. We'll see.
Doing the double, quite possibly.
For sure. All right. Well, let's go one more then, Quinn.
Yeah, one more is just our third story is just U.S. soccer in Florida. It's December. Everybody could, in a lot of parts of the country are just wishing they could be down in Florida right now. We're all jealous of Mark, our usual host. He's covering the DA Winter Cup this week.
One of the very few things we're jealous of him about.
He's going to be so tan when he comes back. I'm going to be mad.
No doubt. But anyway, so yeah, there's just a lot of U.S. soccer stuff happening right now down in Florida. You've got the boys DA. They just finished up their Winter Cup this past week, and down at the DA Winter Cup on the boys' side, they had just a really impressive group of pro scouts, international scouts, and obviously tons of college scouts. But I was really impressed just looking at the list of the scouts that were out at that event. A lot of top European clubs, South American clubs were out in force, and a lot of major sponsors and agents, agencies were there just scouting the event. So I know Dortmund was there. So really just an impressive event that they just finished off.
We can't remember. That event's a big part of Christian Pulisic's creation fable. He was first spotted and came to prominence on the international stage, at least among the scouting community and the clubs, and that was sort of the trajectory started at the Nike Friendlies when he was 15, 16 years old, and so people know, the scouts know.
Yeah, so no surprise that Dortmund's back this year then.
And something, just a little tidbit, maybe something that will be that people may want to watch. One of the conversations I've heard, we talked a lot about, U.S. soccer's issues, right? They want to have a national training center, or maybe a series of national training centers, conceivably even move their headquarters out of Soccer House in Chicago because there's no field space. The winter conditions are not ideal. They're already kind of bursting at the seams in this old house they're based at. I'm very intrigued to see. I think people should keep on their radar the Florida angle you just mentioned. I'm hearing that there may be some kind of partnership between the Federation and maybe a pro club, maybe one of the facilities down there. We may see a more formal relationship get struck up for the Federation to actually kind of take a share, or at least take a control of a certain territory down there that they could use year-round.
That's really interesting, and obviously the Nike Friendlies, like you mentioned, is such a big event every year that it makes a lot of sense for that those relationships to continue. One relationship obviously that U.S. Soccer has is with IMG Academy down there in Bradenton. That's another Florida hotspot for this week. That's where the U.S. women's national team is holding their ID camp with a lot of young players, a lot of college players called in for that camp. That kicked off early this week. And we also mentioned the Nike International Friendlies. Those are continuing this week on the women's side. And we have the U20 women's national team competing in that this week.
Great. Well, thanks so much, as always, Quinn and Charlie, for your contributions to that segment. When we come back after this break, we're going to dig into the professionalization of youth soccer and really dig into that buzzword pay to play. We'll be back. Welcome back to the SoccerWire Podcast. I'm Chris Hummer alongside Quinn Casteel and Charles Boehm again, reminding everyone that superhost Mark Serber is thankfully down in Florida covering the U20 Women's Nike International Friendlies. So we won't have any stupid nicknames for you this week, Charlie.
I'm crushed.
We got plenty of reaction last week to our discussion about professionalization of youth soccer, and want to invite everybody to continue to interact with Charlie on his amazing Twitter and with SoccerWire at the SoccerWire on Twitter. So one of the things I want to start off here is just make sure we define clearly what professionalization of the game really means. We got some shade and some good interaction this week on Twitter from a couple of folks that are really into the pro rel. And for the parents on the listening to the podcast, that means the belief that the professional system in the U.S. should be tiered in a way like it is in basically the rest of the world, to where when teams finish at the top of a league in a lower division, they get promoted or pro, and when teams finish at the bottom, they get relegated down. So it's very Darwinism in its approach, and I think a lot of people believe that it would solidify the pyramid of soccer in this country. Most of it is on the men's side until we get a second professional women's league going. It won't be as much of an issue there, but that's not really what I think we were trying to talk about. By the professionalization of the game, we're talking about the youth game, and that so many things are changing in the last couple of decades that are causing people to make their careers and make their living and make their businesses, such as travel agencies and so forth, all about generating revenue for themselves or as what they do for a living, meaning that soccer is no longer a volunteer recreational sport. It's something that is very serious, that people pay really good money for, and by definition, it's now a professional industry, and what goes into that.
I want to unpack this a little bit too, because I want to make sure we're fair. Like pro rel is a big conversation, and we don't have time for it in this episode to get into really flesh it out. But I think it does have some some worth in this discussion because, for one thing, a lot of people use pro-rel as kind of a shorthand for a meritocratic system. The idea being that the places in the pyramid, whether it's on an individual, club, or team level, and it can be, a lot of leagues around the country, youth leagues still use pro-rel, and in some cases I think it's a benefit for development. In other cases, maybe less so, in terms of how the interface between that and the developmental process in general. But I think the idea that we can make it about your quality as a team, coach, or player or club on the pitch rather than in the boardroom or at the cash register. I think there's a definite hunger to have that, because we all see that this big, chaotic, capitalistic system of youth soccer is often driven by money more so than who's the best at what they do and where the results are. So I want to make sure I want to show respect to the topic. I've had several people bring up to me that, look, you can't talk about this professionalization conversation without looking at the influence that the professional game has on the youth game. And there's those that feel that MLS and the professional clubs have taken a chokehold in sort of how things are structured and where the power dynamics lie. There's others that feel that if we had a meritocratic system, that we would, or maybe if we changed the incentives, if we were more economic incentives, right? If the parents were not the ones in charge because they write the checks, if the professional clubs or professional clubs from overseas, for that matter, were writing checks based on, buying players, paying training compensation and solidarity and that sort of things. If the sort of incentivization was different, that could reform the system as a whole. I think there's worth to some of those arguments. My question is whether those are a cure-all or a kind of this Adam Smith invisible hand type of idea. I'm a little skeptical of that, but I'm totally willing to have those discussions. Hit us up on social media. We can do a future episode on these theories and these views.
Yeah, I love the passion of these pro-rel guys on Twitter. Like, people have their whole Twitter accounts dedicated to, I'm a pro-rel guy, and they're really focused on the player development pyramid. And even if you don't agree with 100% of their ideas, I like the fact that we have people out there who are so passionate about it.
I think there's a hunger for some transparency and a clearer path of things, right? So there's those that feel that pro-rel is the route to the truly unified pyramid that we talked about in the last episode. I think it could be an ingredient for sure. I think it could be a really positive thing in a lot of ways. It's fun to consider what our system could look like if everything was strictly based on results on the pitch. But I've also seen cases where, in some cases, like putting youth players and coaches in a pro-rel environment can sometimes lead to results being valued a little bit excessively, right? And that can have an effect on how players are treated, the style of play that's put into effect. So there's a lot of complexities to it. Again, though, I think the people that have the idea that pro-rel can solve pay to play, I think you got to show your work a little bit more there. And again, we can have this chat. We can even get some guests on. I'd love to delve into it. I personally we've written a lot on the training compensation solidarity issue over the years. I think that some version of that has to be tailored to the American environment and the American realities could have a really positive effect on youth soccer in this country. But it's not. There's no magic bullets out there.
There's just no doubt. I couldn't agree more that there's no magic bullet, and I think we're going to get into pay to play on this podcast, but I think pro-rel kind of ties in because pro-rel and pay to play are both buzzwords. They're two of the most common buzzwords. You hear, almost every single U.S. soccer presidential candidate back a couple of years ago when the election was going on, everybody from Hope Solo to Carlos Cordero to Kyle Martino, everybody has these talking points. We got to fix pay to play. We need pro-rel. And they become buzzwords to the point where they almost lose all meaning. And so I think today we want to focus on pay to play and really get in and be very specific and define these things so that they don't become these same tired conversations. And so, yeah, we can kind of move on to that.
Yeah, I mean, let me just put a stake or a bookmark in the pro-rel conversation per Charlie's conversation. But just one more comment from me on this. There is a romantic approach to the idea of pro-rel, and I'm not a pro-rel guy on my Twitter, but I think I believe in it. I wish it were the case. And again, the debate becomes about, you were fooling ourselves because it's just the way the system is set up. The professional league owns all the teams, and no owner is going to come into a system and be willingly ejected. It doesn't happen in the NFL. It doesn't happen in baseball. So until MLS can either buy USL or grow to 60 or 70 teams themselves, and again, it's a whole other conversation. The one part that irks me, I guess, if you really think about it, is that whole conversation pulls sort of a shade over the situation that it's men. I mean, all these, even if pro-rel was quote unquote the silver bullet to fix the youth soccer system in the United States, it would only fix the men's side because there is only a 9 and now I guess 10 team league women's professional league here. That's, they're doing better, but most of the teams are losing. It doesn't fix the youth soccer system, pro-rel. It doesn't
I just think a lot of the problems predate even the professional game in this country. The roots of the pay-to-play system date back to, you could argue, the 70s, maybe the 70s, definitely the 80s, where there was no, this was a recreational pursuit, and we've grown and we've pumped more money and everything else into it. Yeah. But the bones of the system date back a lifetime.
Yeah, professionalizing the game, again, even just isolating it in the men's side for discussion, would create financial incentives that make things clear. And this gets to what Quinn was talking about, but let's define pay-to-play, because the pay-to-play doesn't happen unless the parents are willing to pay. And what we talked about last week was the confusion, and 2 weeks before that, where we talked about the alphabet soup of all the leagues, is the people are willing to pay for something that they think they're getting a return on investment in. And there's a lot of things that go into this definition of pay to play in our sport that cause parents to write checks. And I think parents would be less willing, fewer parents, or more parents would be skeptical about writing those checks if they understood a little bit more about where they fit in the overall scheme, about the promises that are being made. Some of the things that go into this bottom line of what pay to play is you can't have a soccer game without fields. Referees cost money. As clubs and leagues get professionalized, they have administrators and overhead. They hire executive directors. They hire directors of coaching, technical directors. There's that again, none of which are actually spending time on a field teaching kids and how to play. The coaches themselves, clearly, per we discussed before, they get paid in order to sort of be good at what they do. It's primarily their job. Some of them literally drive Uber, but they can't work evenings and weekends when you're a soccer coach, but they find things to do during the day. But still, coaches cost money. Tournament fees, the whole tournament industry. We love the tournament industry at SoccerWire. There's a lot of them, and we promote the heck out of them. But it's a whole other industry. And if you're not sure where your team fits in, you may pay $1,500 for a tournament and go play games that are worse than if you paid $600 and stayed closer to home. Yeah. Travel costs, miles, hotels, meals, airfare, all this stuff makes soccer cost more money. And some of our, even U.S. Soccer and some of our governing bodies that rail against pay-to-play, they're there by confusing the marketplace. They're adding to the cost.
Yeah, I'd like to we're running low on time for this segment. I would like to just close the segment with by painting a picture around what you were just talking about, Chris, which is basically, let's say I'm a genie and I've solved pay to play, and I'm starting the no pay to play soccer league, and we sit down, we're saying no pay to play. We're done with it. We're sitting down, and we have some kids who want to sign up and play for us. Okay, you sit down. We need fields. Are you like enslaving referees? They need to be paid, like you said. Coaches in this day and age are mostly paid. Fields generally aren't free. Somebody needs to do administrative work and schedule games and all that. So, again, unless you're forcing people to work for free, or unless you have people reffing games for free, which I don't know of a lot of people who are reffing games for free or providing fields for free. So I think you have to start with that at the base and just be like, what world are we in where nobody's paying for somebody has to pay for it.
So it used to be that way. It's a volunteer sport.
Well, part of this is the American capitalist reality, is that our nature as a culture is to find the profit motive in things. And in other countries, there are costs too. They're typically lower though. There's more in Europe, for example. I mean, fields and park space is often handled more collectively. There's more of a community connection on the part of clubs, so that the costs are often lower, and they're subsidized. Let's be honest. I mean, what a lot of us are, when we talk about ending pay to play, we really want is someone else to pick up the charge. Well, our government probably is going to step in and subsidize soccer on any level, more so than the hundreds of millions in some cases that are being used to subsidize sports stadiums. But what a lot of people want to see is the professional game picking up the tab, which they are in many cases. All but 2 of the DA MLS academy programs are fully funded, and it's because that's an investment on the part of those clubs in future professionals. But unfortunately, that's relatively new development, and there's still big costs, and that doesn't apply to everyone. So I think you're still dealing with a service that's being provided, and service providers have costs, and then even before you add in the profit motive.
Yeah, I want to close the segment out with some quick thoughts on things that cost money. I mean, when you mentioned referees, a lot of clubs, a lot of progressive directors of coaching are working at the younger levels, and they're holding scrimmage fests, and the coaches ref. But when we have 6 different pyramids in this country, where again your 6th best U10 team is playing in a travel league, and because we all are paying a lot of money, that game needs a 3-ref system. I mean, it's just not necessary for good player development. But because of the scattershot, multiple pyramid system, everything is costing more. Again, back to the pro rel and everything else. If it could be solidified at the top, and people realize if you're not a part of one of these 30 or 40 professional teams, then maybe you shouldn't be spending $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 a year. All right, and we'll be back after this break to talk about solutions. It sounds like we've been talking about a lot of problems, so we're going to go over a couple of solutions of what you feel the problems are with the pay-to-play system, guys.
SoccerWire is the place for prospective recruits to list themselves and promote their profile to thousands of daily readers, including college coaches, scouts, and more. All recruits can list themselves for life for a small one-time fee. Already committed? Congratulations! All commitments can be reported for free and are included in our nationwide soccer recruiting and tournament wire to over 65,000 people each Thursday. Visit SoccerWire.com to create your player profile today.
Welcome back to the SoccerWire Podcast. We want to thank everyone who's listened and commented on last week's show, and encourage everyone to share, like, subscribe, and rate us. The podcast is growing. Each episode has more and more listens, and I want to stop hitting refresh on my stats thing, and love just to have that great surprise. So please get involved, everyone. Also, feel free to reach out to Quinn Casteel at the news desk at news@soccerwire.com with any tips, comments, college commitment news, anything you feel about youth soccer, what you've heard here, what you've read on SoccerWire.com. This is Chris Hummer filling in for regular host Mark Serber for episode 11 of the SoccerWire Podcast. I'm here again with executive editor Quinn Casteel and regular contributor Charles Boehm. And we spent the last 15 minutes or so talking about pay-to-play in American youth soccer, and it sounds like we've had a lot of problems. So we're going to spend this segment talking more about solutions. Jumping on Quinn's last segment comment about being a genie, I think he's probably one of the ones to look for a magic wand. But why don't we each take some time to have at least 2 solutions that we think would reduce the cost to youth soccer, or somehow otherwise fix what's perceived as a problem with the professionalization of the game. Anyone want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick things off. For me, my first solution is to just have parents be as informed as possible about the marketplace of youth soccer. And I'm very much sympathetic to parents. I think parents oftentimes get a bad rap with youth sports in general, but most of the parents I see at youth soccer games really just want the best for their kids. They want to provide the best opportunities for their kids. And unfortunately, in some cases, I just get the feeling that parents, because they're busy and have other jobs and they're not, youth soccer industry experts, they don't really understand where exactly their kid and their kid's team fits into the overall youth soccer player development pyramid. And so they end up shelling out tens of thousands of dollars, traveling all over the country to compete in a league when their player is, for what is basically we call glorified rec soccer, where, these are not players who are traveling all over the place getting scholarships or professional looks. They're really just doing it for fun. And I think a lot of parents get duped with all the buzzwords like premier and elite. A lot of parents kind of get duped into thinking that whatever level their kid is at is higher than it really is. So I think if you had the solution in that is just, almost like a Better Business Bureau or an Angie's List thing, where if it's a supply and demand thing where parents some percentage of parents, if they really knew what level their kid was at, would just choose not to spend tens of thousands of dollars and travel all over the country. They'd choose more local options, and some of these leagues would just disappear because there wouldn't be as much demand for them.
And I think as a parent myself with a 5-year-old, a lot of times we take our cues from other parents, right? If you're not really
exactly what I was
up to date on you're not extremely in the loop, and we all know, like, we live in this soccer environment, but it can be a little bit of a bubble, and if you're outside the bubble, it looks a little mystifying, and so you look around and it looks like you want your kid to have the same opportunities as the kid they're competing with, maybe for honor roll in school or that they're carpooling with, and then it's easy to get into this sort of arms race mindset, which this follows on. Like one of the items I've got. I think we have to look at the big problem, and again, it transcends soccer. It's all sports. The recreational tagged sports competitions and leagues are dwindling. They're dying out in a lot of cases, whereas the quote-unquote elite travel options are proliferating. And we need a shift. I don't know if we need to come up with new terminology to change the naming, to take the stigma out of rec. But, I played rec soccer for most of my upbringing, and you can have a great experience. Here in the D.C. area, we have the Suburban Friends League, which is kind of a system without tryouts where the local clubs that we all know, as typically run elite operations or travel operations, they also have an option one rung below where you just sign up and you get on a team and you travel around the Beltway playing other basically rec teams from other clubs in the area, where you can, within an hour's drive, you can play someone else, you can have fun, you can get a good level of competition. If your kid is dominating a league like that, then maybe it's time to move up. If the kid gets a taste and wants more, take them forward. But a lot of kids can check all the boxes that you need from a youth soccer experience without getting into travel, this, that, and the other.
Yeah, and I think that things like that are just a great option, great alternative. And I think, parents they don't want to be the reason that their kid didn't get a college scholarship, because, they don't want to say no to this national league, something or other league, and then feel like, because they said no, their kid didn't get the opportunity that they might have gotten. But I think that is used against parents in a lot of cases to get them to spend more money and do more travel. And also, some parents do understand that whatever league their kid is in is not that serious, but they do the travel anyway just for the experience. That's fine. But again, I think if you could wave a magic wand and educate all parents on the youth soccer landscape, then some percentage of them would choose more local options, like you described, Charlie, and there would be less demand for some of these, comprehensive pay-to-play organizations.
What you got, Chris?
Yeah, so Quinn, kind of to your point first, Quinn, I question whether or not the majority of the parents that are deciding to spend all this money are doing so because they think they're on a pretty specific pathway, like it's clear to them in some way. I would be willing to bet and we again love to hear from the parents, that I think it's more their kids are having a blast. They become really good friends with the other kids on their teams, and they almost get caught up in the whirlwind. I mean, it's a big deal. And I remember this coaching, when you're at tryout time and you've got oftentimes some of the best quote unquote locker room players, the kids that are like they make it the most fun and they have the fun parents and the really involved parents, and sometimes the team manager. A little side note: if you run a travel team, make sure the team manager is the parent of your best kid, so you never have to cut that kid because you keep a good team manager. But it's really more the inertia of being a parent. And Charlie, you got a 5-year-old. Quinn, you don't have any kids yet, but you were one once. But, I've got kids that are teenage college graduates in college already, have been through this. And I see it in our peers that I would be willing to bet yes, the confusion and the lack of education is the reason, but that's sort of like the parents that are out front, that are driving for more, that are trying to create opportunities. They don't like the crosstown team, or their kid didn't make that team, so they get involved and throw their weight behind making the team they can get their kid on to be good. And then it's really hard. Imagine being a parent who says, no, you know what, we can't afford this anymore. But my kid's, like the center midfielder that has like 30 assists, and if they drop out, the team's not gonna win any games. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I mean, you can also build the same camaraderie locally. Who's to say you can't just have a long, sustaining team that doesn't travel across the country? But anyway, my other solution, Chris, is just more individual, on your own work and training. And this goes into what people have been saying for years, and I'm very much on board this idea of don't play too many games. So many youth soccer players play way too many games throughout the year. And if they are really focused on their development in any serious way, you'd be much better off spending at least 1, if not 2 or 3 seasons out of the year focused on all of the stuff that isn't fun, but that gets you to the next level, whatever that it may be, which is, instead of playing 20 games during the summer, why aren't you working on your squats, building up your lower body strength? Why aren't you, spending an hour a day working on footwork and agility in your backyard? There's so many things that you can and that you have to do on your own, that just playing a lot of games doesn't really develop you as an individual.
And this is a good place to note here that one of the founding principles of the Development Academy was to fix this, to change the game to training ratio. The idea is it was built on the concept of 4 trainings for every game. Now, it seems that sometimes they've maybe dwindled from this a bit. We're not sure everybody's still held to this a decade later, but that concept matters. I mean, you don't need to play more than 1 game a week. Games should matter. And it's still amazing to me that the amount of time and energy and money that's spent on tournament environments, which are the worst possible physical environment. You're talking about if we all collectively agree, if physiologically these kids need to play 1 game, maybe 2 a max, and you got them playing 3 in a weekend, that should be the absolute minimum. I mean, that should only be happening when you have to get elite competition against one another. And now it's just sort of like de rigueur part of the experience.
Well, some of the clubs, the top leagues and the DA itself, they believe that you shouldn't play 3 games in 3 days, so they move their events to 4-day events or 5-day events, yeah. And they make the teams take a break. That's great, and it's this catch-22.
Hotel nights start to stack up.
So but get the people that are making the decisions, and it's not just fewer games; it's more meaningful games as far from a development standpoint. So,
and you've reminded me of a good point. Listen, parents out there, if you have been fired from your job, if you've been demoted, if you've lost your job because you spent too much time taking your kid to tournaments around wherever, hit us up. We'll protect your anonymity. Don't worry. But I want to know, because I know that there are parents making not just the financial sacrifices of writing the checks, but not making the money in the first place because they got to be there. They got to drive the kid around.
There's no doubt. And we got to get to your Charles and Chris's solutions, I just want to finish on
I'm
that
not
note.
doing any squats.
Well,
Yeah, no, but Charles, that is such a great point, because I have to say that this is very anecdotal, I guess you would say, but I know that it's a big thing going on right now, is that when I'm at soccer events, I'm just noticing parents overall are getting very cynical. And I don't blame them in a lot of ways, because they're sitting there, they are kind of they might be mumbling about how far they had to travel for that game or that tournament, but they're still doing it as of now. But I think, again, with more parent education, I think that some will start to make different choices, and they'll just be happier overall.
Yeah, and bitch and moan in your car. Bitch and moan to your other parents. Don't do it in front of the kids, all right?
You're going to get John O'Sullivan to write an article about your car drive home.
And here's another thing. Look, the gig economy is surely going to have an effect on this. My reality as a freelancer is if I don't work, I don't get paid for the most part. Mm-hmm. So I mean, if my kid wants me to drive her hours, I'm like, hey, I gotta sit in the car and work while you're playing. I gotta get something done over here.
You can watch Netflix
bring in the car charger.
I don't have any kids yet, but I'm already putting a firm foot in the ground against traveling across the country or across the state for a weekend game.
That tees me up for one of my favorite solutions here, which is unstructured play. Now you'll hear John O'Sullivan and others have talked a lot about this. We, for a multitude of reasons, everything from culture to safety to the basic design of our cities and communities, where you have to get in the car to go anywhere, right? We don't provide our kids with enough opportunities to play on their own with no coaching around. Just give them a ball and a field or a court or a section of street. This is not in our culture, unfortunately, not on a widespread nationwide level, but there are people trying to do it. Now, it may sound ironic that there are clubs and organizations structuring unstructured play, but that's the solution we need. I want to shout out Prince William Soccer Incorporated. PWSI is an hour or so down the road from D.C. and in Northern Virginia. They have run a summer open play session for PWSI players. So I believe it's 2 or 3 days a week. They've got a field. They have a field reserve. They take care of the insurance and the legal responsibilities, and they just roll the balls out and let the kids play.
I'd be willing to bet they allow non-current players in the club to join in.
And they
too.
do. You've got to register. I'm sure it's an insurance issue or a liability issue, but you can come in and take part. And the idea is just to get more hours on the ball, get more hours around the game. This is a part of, and it's a value added for their parents, right? Because I'm sure it's mostly PWSI kids who are already paying money to be involved, and this is a bonus. But if we can create more and more opportunities to do this, kudos to the U.S. Soccer Foundation and others who are creating these unstructured environments.
Colin
right?
Martino over Under Initiative also helping kids play more for sure.
Right. I mean, this is part of the deal. And if your kid doesn't, it's just like what Quinn said. If your kid isn't interested in going to work on their own and kick a ball against a wall for half an hour or an hour,
then stop spending money on their travel soccer.
If they don't have the intrinsic motivation, if they're not asking for more, don't put it in front of them. And it's the same thing with open play. Like, they should want to go and play with their friends. We have to find a way to get kids away from parents, away from coaches, and just playing, because that's the purest version of the game, and we need to do more of it. And believe me, those 2-3 sessions a week that you're paying for, the organized stuff, has a lot more value and has a lot more positive impact on your kids' game if they're building it and complementing it with an unstructured environment.
So it sounds to me like maybe less is more in a lot of cases with parents, where you're much better off as a parent saying, yeah, you can go out to the mini pitch up the street with your friends, just have fun and stay out of the way. Maybe that's better for player development and other things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we need all. It's a multi-headed solution, and that's a great example of one I think that gets overlooked really easily in our country.
Well, okay, so we're already 15 minutes into the segment, and haven't got to put mine out there yet. So let's just see. If
Keep it moving.
So I'm going to go more administrative. I'm going to bore people, but two big solutions that I have are. They're very macro. One's very macro, one's probably very micro. So not-for-profits, most of the places that these kids play in these structured and or unstructured environments, they're classified as not-for-profits. And for me, the origin of the reason you can form a not-for-profit organization, it doesn't have to be a charity per se, but the whole concept is you're doing something good for your community. And in exchange for that, you don't have to pay taxes. It's not a thing where you're forced to spend all the money, by the way. Not-for-profits have net income all day long. The well-run ones do anyway. They just don't have to pay taxes on it. And that money belongs to the community. You know, if a not-for-profit actually dissolves, that money it has to be given away, any money that's left, to another not-for-profit. It can't just be like paid out to a vendor or something like that. So just ask yourself if you're questioning, you know, where you're sending your checks, especially these not-for-profits that have multiple entity names that maybe, you know, doing things that seem like they're for-profit at the same time. But when you are a not-for-profit organization and you run yourself like a business, you're gaining a lot of savings that really might not have been fair, if you will, in the open marketplace. So, you know, fields are pretty cheap for a not-for-profit. But when the for-profits are charging $5,000 a kid, the not-for-profits are charging $5,000 a kid, holding camps, charging extra money for these training sessions, and they go use a corner of that field, technically most counties, if they bother to enforce that, would tell you that that's not right. They're supposed to charge more for that sort of thing. So that, you know, it's just making it a profit business it just loses the plot for me.
And it's okay to ask questions. You know, you don't have to be a jerk about it as a parent, but ask questions, because I harked back to a situation 3 years ago out in California. A Fullerton Rangers treasurer got busted for embezzling about $200,000 because this nonprofit entity had spun off an LLC, a for-profit entity, to provide higher-level skills training for younger players. So they were trying to do this sort of balance of both ways, and it created an environment that made it easier for this secretary to embezzle. And they got caught, but there's a lot that don't. And be aware, and you should know where the money's going. It's with, you know, if you're a part of that club on any level, there should be complete transparency in how things are done.
Yeah, I'd like to see fewer. The trouble is, you know, the travel soccer is where you have usually the most enthusiastic, the most energetic parents that are involved as volunteers, and they often will then end up on the board of directors of these not-for-profits. And as soon as you get a board of directors that has 4 out of the 7 or, you know, 5 out of the 8 parents that are the positive voting power for that organization that are travel parents, you're gonna start to see a lot of the decisions about what the club does. We're gonna take out a mortgage to build fields. We're going to subsidize this whole group of kids so we don't lose them. And, you know, it's just if you're a not-for-profit, it almost feels counterintuitive to be a travel soccer organization to me.
And Chris, I don't think you're telling parents or clubs what to do.
No.
But you should be having these discussions as an entity.
Right. I'm just saying, ask about if you're concerned about how much it's costing you, about what the fees are, ask, find out. And I'm just, you know, again, this is a big paintbrush in a sense of there are things that contribute to soccer costing more in this country. And I think when you get the mentality of a day-to-day business where you want to grow, and you will hire more and more and more, and because you hire more and more and more, you have to charge more and more. That's where I'm coming at from. Versus, you know, the original intent of a not-for-profit, the spirit of it for me is that you serve your community. And so, you know, if you're not for profit and you're scholarshiping kids from 2 counties over, are you really reread the mission of your organization, or start a for-profit company? FC Virginia, Pipeline, I think. I'm not sure if they're Pipeline, but there are plenty of soccer clubs out there that started up, you know, with big banners and for-profit, and they that's totally fine.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, that's just much more honest, you know,
that's
to actually
be
for-profit, for sure.
Yep. So again, long segment. My peeve is, I mean, it would be a challenge. U.S. soccer needs to get out of the league business would be another way to reduce because this goes back to either get out of it or get all into it.
I'd like to see the federation be they were once a referee sort of in this world of different factions, and now they are widely perceived to have waded in and become a faction themselves. And I know there were good reasons behind the roots of that shift that they made, starting the DA, all that sort of stuff. There were good reasons for it. There's still some good things that have come out of it.
The reasons where Bradenton was costing way too much money and they couldn't do 4 more.
It's not just the men failing to qualify for the World Cup that has people cynical. It's the whole thing. So we'll see. Look, they just had a board meeting in Chicago. There's an AGM coming up, I believe, in Nashville later this winter. In a few years, Carlos Cordero is going to have to run for re-election. I think next year there's a vice presidential election. these are the opportunities to have these discussions, to have these debates, and let's hope that we go in a positive direction there.
Yeah, for sure. And just to clarify, what I mean by go all in or go all out is if you're going to go all in, then run it better, get a better scouting network, and do the hard thing, meaning you only take kids to the youth national team pools that come out of those leagues or something. You've got to.
Ooh, that's a spicy one. That's a future show.
Well, again, how are we going to unify to one pyramid? That's the answer. So U.S. Soccer adding to the tip of their pyramid, just to me, that would be a magic wand. Probably not going to happen in that particular way, but making the point.
Well, guys, we've blabbed on quite a bit here. I probably only scratched the surface of this topic, but we'll leave it there for now. Tune in next week as we return with the next episode of the SoccerWire Podcast.